Welcome, everyone. My name is Larry Bailey, and we're here with another episode of the Mortgage Community. We meet here weekly at 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays. And it's an open community call, so that means if you want to be part of these community meetings, you can join us always on every Tuesday. We have missed a couple of Tuesdays, but I promise it is rare. If for whatever reason you're watching this replay, thank you very much. The benefit of getting over to the community live events is honestly to ask questions. We try to bring topics that are conversational focused, although I tend to do most of the talking because nobody wants to come up on stage with me. But you can always use the chat feature. So for those that are just joining here, as I'm inviting everybody into the room, go ahead and ask any questions on the chat, and we'll go from there. So we are going to be talking about brokers self-disclosing on your TPO Connect website. That's the agenda. I will say that obviously not everybody in the community administers TPO Connect sites, but there are plenty of folks in the community who are working with investors or with lenders, depending on your channel, who do use the TPO Connect site as your portal access. So show of hands for those that are here today. First question is, how many folks, and you can either show hands or just put it in chat, whatever you feel comfortable doing, but how many are administering TPO Connect? So I see Amy and Katie are on here, so that's cool. So yep, those two are giving me a thumbs up. Is there anybody else besides those two that are actually administering TPO Connect? And if not, totally cool. Now, so flip the question. How many folks on here today are actually using a TPO Connect website as a user? And so you go on to somebody else's, an investor's website, and you're actually leveraging it to do your business, to sell loans. And if you don't know if you're using a TPO Connect site, it wouldn't surprise me. I can spot them in the wild, so to speak, because they have a very specific methodology for how on how they're accessed and how they're used. So why is this all important? Honestly, the reason why this is an important topic, although you might not be maybe aligning to it because you don't have TPO Connect or use TPO Connect, it's all about figuring out how to work towards disclosure automation and data validation in your disclosure process so that you can allow folks that you would not normally think it would be okay to self-disclose to give them that ability to self-disclose. Now, it's interesting because it's 2024, about 10 years ago, maybe even 11 or 12 actually at this point, but at least 10 years ago, the very first company, as far as I know, the very first company that came out that gave their brokers the ability to self-disclose, anybody want to guess who that was? It's a pretty big company. They go by 3 letters. Nobody's guessing it. So United Wholesale Mortgage, UWM. And UWM came out with their own website and with technology that was honestly, at the time, like crazy. Like, who would let brokers self-disclose? Like, the complications that could arise, the technology that was needed at the time, the workflows that honestly didn't exist. You still had some people on paper. So it was a crazy kind of time for UWM to come out with brokers allowing them to self-disclose. And so here we are 10 years later talking about this. And what's funny is it's still a big problem. Most companies, it isn't the technology that provides the opportunity to allow someone to go to your website and pull down disclosures. Like, that's no big deal. Anybody can request a set of documents. It's the data in the document, right? It's the data validation that's usually the problem. And so one of the things that I try to talk to companies that are implementing allowing TPOs to self-disclose on their TPO Connect site is I ask them, how are they making sure that the data that goes into the loan file is at a level that they're comfortable with? Now, obviously, I'm not going to give you compliance advice, right? That's not why I'm here. But I can tell you that it is very, very common for companies to, if they look at what the process is to produce these disclosures, and I'm going to walk you through this step by step here. It's the whole point of today's meeting. But they realize that actually they're maybe overreacting. Maybe they're a little bit too stingy in getting those initial disclosures out. Naturally, there's things that we can't screw up on, right? We cannot screw up on transfer tax. We cannot underdisclose fees based upon the scenario provided. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to work through this problem from a TPO perspective, because I want you to start thinking about a retail perspective. I want you to really start thinking about, why do I need a disclosure desk? Now, there could be very good reasons why you want a person to be able to validate something that's complicated, something maybe that's got multiple borrower pairs, or maybe you've got a bond program, or maybe you've got some really wild, maybe it's a 203K and you want to make sure it's done properly. So I'm not suggesting we can do everything, right? But if you go through your pipeline of not even closed, disclosed loans, chances are these are things that probably could have either been done by the originator, or in this case, we're going to go through the broker, or it could have been actually done automatically. And in prior community meetings, we've talked about using workflow rules to do automations. And of course, one of the results in an automation is to produce initial disclosures. For those that didn't get my post or didn't get the email from ICE not too long ago, earlier today, the version 24.3 is coming out, due to be released on December 7th. And there's about 100 pages of updates for TPO, for Encompass Web. And then there's updates also for TPO Connect. That thing's really light. It's only about 10 pages. And then you've got Encompass Desktop updates coming out with 24.3. I'm imagining Consumer Connect will be updated somewhere in the middle there too, maybe. But the bottom line is there are a ton of updates that are happening. Keep an eye out. I'll be doing walkthrough videos on all these release notes here this week. I'll get them out hopefully over the weekend, if not beginning of next week. And I'm going to walk you through that information. There's bound to be plenty to talk about when it comes to workflow engine updates and input forms and how they're behaving. A quick glance at the release notes. If you haven't already, you're going to be able to access Encompass Web features through Encompass Desktop. And this speaks to really ICE's methodology of making sure that you've got the right tools for where you need them to be the most successful in your workflow. All right, so let's get into actually how do we get here. I'm going to share a screen, and I'm going to share a project that I completed beginning of this year. I don't know if anybody knows First Community Mortgage or a mortgage boutique. Some truly awesome people. If you're looking for, by the way, plug for them. If you're looking to partner with a wholesale lender or correspondent lender, and you don't know who a mortgage boutique is, give them a shout. Alan Michaels and I, and one of his daughters, Marissa and I. Well, Marissa, I've known only recently, but Alan and I actually got into knowing each other back in '93. Like, it's really, really old stuff. And he was with Cardinal for a while, but anyway, he's doing some great stuff over at First Community. And what happened here was these guys were on another platform. Doesn't matter who. They were on another platform, and I got the call at the end of last year, and it was like, "Hey, can you help us with TPO Connect? And we also need to make sure our brokers can self-disclose." I said, "Sure, let's go for it." And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the steps that how we do it here on TPO Connect. And I want you to be thinking about, if you don't do wholesale or TPO Connect, totally fine. But I want you to put this frame of reference in retail, and I'll do some call outs here. So naturally, the logging in, let me just go ahead and log in into here, and I'll bring you into a test file. The settings on here for TPO Connect to be able to enable disclosures are very, very similar to what you'll see in your desktop settings. So I'm just going to go into this Andy America file. And again, forget about the UI for a second. All I want you to focus on is the actions, is the workflow, right? Workflow before technology. And so when you're in a retail file, you're going to be obviously ordering credit and running AUS. In a non-retail situation, you have to be able to make sure that TPO has the ability to re-import, especially if it's um, a file that is going to be running DU or LPA on your TPO Connect site. So this is important to make sure that you've got lined up properly with your credentials, et cetera. And what's also important is making sure that you control the workflow. So as an example, if for some reason the client comes down and just wants to send disclosures right away, they haven't re-imported their AUS, they haven't or reissued their credit, they haven't imported liabilities, they haven't run AUS, they haven't gone and gotten their fees yet, all that other stuff, you're going to get all kinds of errors in here. When you click that send disclosure button, you're going to get a whole bunch of required fields in here that's going to put them into a never-ending loop. And it's an important thing I want to talk about first, because you have to know the workflow and you have to know what they're not taking care of before they get here. So when you come in to sending disclosure, I'm going to start at the end first. Gang, if you haven't done one-time passcode yet, this is what it's going to look like for you sending disclosures through one-time passcode, where you're able to go through these 4 steps, and you pick your plan code, and you click next, and it's going to go through a loan audit. So what's happening on TPOC right now is the thing that we want to happen inside of Encompass. We're not only running a data validation audit, but we're also running a compliance Maven audit on the file. And if there are any problems, we'll get these either recommendations or we'll get these requirements. And so that will come in, and they'll have to manage these things accordingly. And if everything's good, they can go ahead and click next. You're getting a user not allowed. And so this messaging is a little bit odd if you're not used to it, but the ability to perform specific actions in TPO Connect is limited based upon the rules that you put in place. So in Encompass, we're used to seeing these kinds of actions through persona access to fields or persona access to loans. Maybe you use like a services limiter or something like that, like a third-party plugin, to make sure that teams can't do something before other things are done. And what you're able to do with TPO Connect is do these things called persona access to loan actions, where you don't allow a user to be able to do an action like sending disclosures or requesting disclosures, things like that. So how do we get here, and what in the important parts? First thing is, of course, you've got to make sure you've got your pricing lined up. So in this environment, this is tied into Optimal Blue, and the user would go out once they click on request pricing to go out to the OB site, do some work, and then have it come back. One really important feature that's always important to talk about, whatever PPE you're using, is if the user does not lock. So what happens on a float? Now with OB and TPOC, in case you didn't know, if it's a float, it's not my ideal situation, but the loan information does not get updated from an OB float. So if you're using Optimal Blue and you're thinking about getting into TPO, keep that in mind. If you're using other PPEs, just make sure that you've vetted exactly what happens on a float, not only for TPO business, but also for retail business. There's some other PPEs out there besides ICE PPE and besides Optimal Blue that are new on the market, and you definitely want to make sure you check with them on how your Encompass loan file gets updated on a float. So once you have that done, it'll make more sense. Next thing, of course, you have to have is fees. Now, the good news is on TPOC, you've got more than one option. So you've got Closing Corp, which has been here from the beginning. That's what this is mapped to. And now you've got other options as well. You can check with your vendors on that to see who's currently enabled for your fees. And so if we come in and we select, we can see some service order history over here from the provider, the record that is there. When you click order service, just like you would in EPC. So, right, if this doesn't feel like EPC to you, then you're not using it often inside of desktop or web for retail. So once we're in here in TPOC, we're going to click order fees, and this is going to spin up the UI for the fee engine that we're using. Again, in this case, it's Closing Court, Smart Fees. And so in here, you can configure, additional file data and questions that need to be answered. If you've never used Closing Corp or Smart Fees, this might look unfamiliar to you, but the TPO can come in and adjust what you allow them to based upon what needs to be done in here. We're going to continue to fees. And so what's really important on this is, again, the validity of the data. So if we go ahead and export these fees back to Encompass, and then if we just simply allow our teams to update those fees errantly, right, that reduces the quality of the data, that reduces the quality of the assurance of what they did is going to be reliable for those disclosures, especially for something like transfer tax or some other fees that are not easily changeable if there's not a valid change circumstance. And so that will go ahead and export back into Encompass, give you a little positive message over here of success. You can then come in as the TPO and you can update your 2015 itemization. So this is where all the information will come back in. I'll go down to this section. So what's super nice inside TPOC is you can allow or disallow users to modify these labels if you want, or these fees if you want, add additional fees, etc. This is also where, again, as TPO, you can change between borrower paid and lender paid manually here. That's if it's floating. If it's going to be locked, obviously that's going to be chosen from your product and pricing engine in terms of what comes back. And once you have all this information in here at this point, you should really be thinking to yourself as you're sitting there watching me as I go through this, you're like, okay, well, what about the 1003? What about all the other disclosures? What about the home counseling? What about the settlement service provider list? What about the state-specific disclosures? You guys are mostly admins on here, right? And so you're probably, if you're not already thinking about that, you at least should be. And the reality is, when we go through the configuration, the home counselor, when you come over to send disclosure, the home counselor is actually running up here. It was one of the first things that you got automated home counselor. This actually was here before it went into admin tools. So as a reminder, if you haven't enabled that in your admin tools to run home counselor, go ahead and do that. For those that are still using a plugin to do that, you need to kind of rip it out because you really should be leveraging the admin tool for home counselor, not only for the sake of making sure that whether your users go to desktop or eventually to web, it's also one less plugin that you need. So there's that. As far as the other parts that are happening inside of a loan file, there's a lot of automation within TPOC to make sure that the SSPL, again, if we go, we don't even let our TPOs get over into the SSPL input form because they don't need to. Why don't they need to? Because that's part of the fee import. So when fees come back from Closing Corp or any other fee provider, it's actually going straight into the SSPL and building that for you. So that's taken care of. As far as other items and other fees, there is a fair bit of training that you have to go through with your workflow to make sure that we've got enough information pre-filled in via template or via business rules. Usually it's DDAs. Sometimes you can use field triggers, but if it's static information or information that should be there regardless of what actions are taken, obviously DDA is your preference normally. Okay, so ultimately, when you do send out those disclosures in TPOC, you still have your disclosure tracking timeline, things like that. Last but not least, when we get into this disclosure conversation with TPOs, you've got the e-sign function up here at the pipeline view. And this is similar to what we see with LO Connect, right? When we go into, if you log into LO Connect, assuming you enable it, you have your, I'm calling it LO Connect because I'm an old guy. But if you go into Encompass Web, you'll see it in there as a loan officer. You'll see your options to e-sign. It's the same. And so in here, we present it. If we've got something to e-sign, we can go ahead and e-sign that just like you normally would. It'll spin up. If you click here, it'll spin up your DocuSign portal if it's working properly. And you can go ahead and sign for that information. It's probably not behaving properly because this was sent to a different LO, not the FCM LO. That in there, so that's probably why it fails. And the last thing is what I'll say is, again, now that we have the ability to, assuming you're using enhanced conditions, one of the other things that happens when it comes to disclosures is sometimes you'll have companies come in and produce conditions in here for enhanced that are pre-application or TPO specific. So as a reminder, with enhanced conditions, you have the ability to create condition types. That means that you can create TPO specific conditions to be automatically added based upon what's happening here. So that's really the magic that I wanted to walk you through today in terms of automated disclosures in TPOC. I'm not seeing any questions coming through chat. One of the things that I would normally come back to if you had any questions is, how do you get someone in workflow to feel comfortable to allow for those disclosures to be automatically created? One of the things that I'll point back to is your data validation. So I'm going to bring open on screen for right now. I'm going to bring open an input form that I created to address this problem in particular. Let's see if I can get logged in. And what I'm going to show you is a methodology of using custom field calculations to go and make sure that you've got enough information in that loan file to give you a pass. And if it doesn't give you a pass, to tell you why it doesn't give you a pass. So I don't know if anyone's ever tried this, but what I have seen some folks try to do this kind of a thing with form load code or some other kind of fanciness like that. I'm not that complicated of a guy. I'd like to use custom field calculations. And so if we go into, as an example, if we go into this quick qual, which I've shown publicly before, but this initial disclosure review, this is the kind of methodology that I'm talking about. So for yourselves as admins, as you're building it out, or as decision makers for your business, this kind of methodology can help you get to the ability to allow your company to produce the files that meet the requirements that you're looking for. This is also a methodology that I found to be helpful for companies that can't quite put their hands around the comfort level to allow for certain loans to be either disclosed by a sales team or disclosed in lights out, meaning that once something happens, the disclosures will automatically go out to the borrower via workflow engine. So behind all this, these are just kind of the results, but there's all kinds of custom field calcs going on behind here. What's really nice about this methodology, of course, is you can break things up, and you might have a different flow, right? You might have a different level of requirements that you're going through. But I do want you to kind of take a peek at this and let this hopefully inspire you to come up with a solution that works for you. Again, on retail, so that you can work towards leveraging what I think is a huge move positive for the entire set of clients. Everybody in the lending industry that's using Encompass is to be able to get those disclosures out quicker to your borrowers. This is the number one thing in sales, by the way. If you've never sold, you need to be able to seamlessly go from, "Hi, I'm Larry," to, "Here's your disclosures. Are we ready to move forward? Please sign. And what credit card do you want to use for the appraisal?" The shorter you make that time frame, the more likely you are to keep that client. And if you talk to your sales team, they will agree to that statement 100,000%. And they're going to then turn to you and say, "Okay, how do we get there? What do we have to do?" And on the TPO side, the way you get there is let the brokers go and get their own disclosures. It's right there. Let them go do it, whether that's wholesale or any other channel. And in retail, when it comes to Encompass, it's the same conversation. How do we get from the borrower saying, "Sounds good, Larry. What do we do next?" And Larry can go, "Well, I just sent you the disclosures in your inbox. Let's go through them together." That's where you want to get to. And that was the whole point of today's conversation. Was I know it was focused in on TPO because I felt it was just a good way to do it. I don't think it's talked about enough on honestly how powerful TPO Connect is. There's lots of companies that pour a ton of cash into custom solutions for their non-retail channels in terms of a website. But TPO Connect is getting more advanced. There's lots of features that you can put in here. If there's anything I can ever do, or if you know anyone that I can help them with their TPO Connect site, we've got more people here at Mortgage Workflow Partners than myself who actually help on those projects as well. So there's that, and then also on with Encompass, obviously, if you need if you want any conversation about how this works or how to get you and your company working into using enhanced conditions or using disclosures, especially if they're automated, to help shorten that sales cycle to get more borrowers into your pipeline quicker. That's what we're here for too. So any questions on this? Candace says you have, I have to use my glasses, Candace. We have bot Ollie. Ollie, it took me a bit to get used to the idea of an auto disclosure, but the bot only sends disclosures from what it sees in its own pipeline. Yeah, so you have a bot, which is you mean like an outside piece of software that you have crawling into Encompass to open the file and do things? Yeah. See, there's that, and then there's other third-party companies that have like automated initial disclosures. It's just rules, guys. It's just rules. And so the Olibot thing for Candace has a set of rules that it has to follow, and you're screwed if the UI changes. Like if anything changes in that process that Ollie was programmed for, you're totally screwed. Ollie's dead. And so if you have bots and you have these other third parties, you already have what you need. You have the skeleton of what you need to do it on your own. And I'm just going to, kind of strongly encourage that you really explore, no matter what you spent on Ollie or what you spent with any third party for this technology, you got to use what you already pay for in a meaningful way. And I would challenge anybody here today or listening to this replay, challenge me where where Encompass falls short to be able to get those disclosures out to you. Because chances are what you're requiring to be done up front is great, but it's probably not really required. It's probably only there because of loan quality issues that you have, which is a whole nother workflow problem. Or it's something that was needed in the past, no longer needed, meaning that something got changed in workflow or something got changed in regulations. Or your corporation, your company decided to handle those risk situations differently than worrying about initial disclosures. But great feedback, Kenneth. Yeah, bots were a thing. Bots obviously still are a thing with some companies, but a bot should be the last thing that you turn to. API first, SDK second, especially because it's being deprecated sooner or later. And then bots, or RPA, another word for bot is robotic process automation. Bot is the very last choice because they're extraordinarily fragile. And they're hard to maintain, and they're expensive to build. Cool. That's all I got for today. Anybody have any last questions before we break? Today's been awesome. Hopefully it's been valuable for you. We'll update November's and December's timeline coming up. We've got some really exciting news to share soon about what we're doing and trying to help you be a better administrator and a better user of Encompass. So stay tuned for that. I don't see anything, so I will let you guys get back to your day. Have an awesome rest of your day. Thanks for coming. We'll see you now. Bye-bye.